The Law of Dependent Arising, The Secret to Bondage and Release. Sermon 14 by Bhikkhu K Ñāṇananda. Narrated by Bhikkhu Candana. Sermon 14. Pahankanwa Sermon number 196. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage be to the Fortunate One, the Worthy, fully enlightened. Idang jatu vedagu, idang jatu sabbaji, idang jatu apalikhatang, gandhamulang palikanninti. This is the perfect mastery of the Veda. This is called victory over all. This is the extraction of the root of the abscess, hitherto unextracted. Uddaka Sutta, from the Samyutta Nikāya. Dear listeners, any person with an inquiring eye could see that all activities pertaining to the continuum of life of beings in samsara take place within the 6 sense spheres. The internal sense spheres, namely the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, are referred to as salayatana in the teaching of the law of dependent arising. These 6 internal sense spheres coordinate with the 6 external sense spaces, i.e., external objects: sound, smell, taste, body contact, and mental objects, Dhamma. They attract the worldlings towards the vortex between consciousness and name and form. We have chosen as the topic for this 14th discourse on Paṭicca Samuppāda a verse from the Uddaka Sutta of the Salayatana Samyutta in the Samyutta Nikāya. On a certain occasion, the Buddha, addressing the monks, recalled a certain past incident. Monks, Uddaka Ramaputta used to declare thus: Idang jatu vedagu, idang jatu sabbaji, idang jatu apalikhatang, ganda mulang palikanninti. Let's go through the meaning first. Idang jatu vedagu means this is the perfect mastery of the Veda. Idang jatu sabbaji means this is called victory over all. Idang jatu apalikhatang gandamulang palikanninti. This is the extraction of the root of the abscess hitherto unextracted. After uttering this verse, the Buddha makes an unusual remark. Monks, although Uddaka made this joyous utterance, it is only a monk in this dispensation who is qualified to do so. Then he proceeds to reinterpret this puzzle-like verse. Monks, how does one gain mastery over the Vedas? Yato ko bhikkave bhikkhu channang passayatananang samudayancha attagamancha assadancha adinavancha nissarananancha yatabhutang pajanati evanko bhikkave bhikkhu vedagu hoti. To the extent a monk realizes with wisdom the 6 spheres of contact as they really are, with regard to their arising, ceasing, satisfaction, perils, and stepping out, to that extent he will have mastery of the Vedas. The second question is then taken up. Monks, how can one become a sabbaji, one who is victorious over all? Then comes the explanation, similar to the first one. Yato ko bhikkave bhikkhu channang passayatananang samudayancha attagamancha assadancha adinavancha nissaranam ca yatha bhutang viditva anupadaya vimutto hoti. He who realizes with wisdom the 6 spheres of contact earlier mentioned, with regard to their arising, ceasing, satisfaction, perils, and stepping out, and will attain release with total detachment, such a person is Sabbāji, a man who is victorious over all. Monks, how can one say that the root of the abscess, so far unextracted, has now been extracted? This is a more puzzling statement than the earlier two. Monks, ganda, or abscess, is a synonym for the body, composed of the 4 primaries, which are earth, water, heat, and wind, born of mother and father, composed of gross food, inheriting the quality of impermanence, having the nature of rubbing, massaging, breaking up, and scattering. What, monks, is the root of the abscess? Gandamula. The root of the abscess is a synonym for craving. Monks, to what extent can you say that the root of the abscess has been extracted? If a monk has eliminated craving, uprooted it, destroyed it like an uprooted palm, reduced to a state of non-arising, such a monk can be called one who has extracted the root of the abscess, hitherto unextracted. According to this explanation offered by the Buddha, we see that Vedagu is a term borrowed from the Brahmins. From a religious point of view, it means a person who has reached mastery over all knowledge. According to the specific interpretation of the Buddha, surpassing all knowledge means the perfect realization of the 5-fold activity of the 6 sense spheres. Similarly, victory over all refers to the above-mentioned perfect realization of the sense spheres, accompanied by the perfect release from all clinging towards them. It is by now clear that both mastery over all and victory over all must be understood in relation to the 6 sense spheres. Since we have been referring to Sabbā, or all, I would like to introduce to you the Sabbā Sutta of the Salayatana Saññutta for the purpose of supportive proof. Sabbā means all. Once the Buddha addressed the monks and said, "Monks, I shall explain to you all. Listen to me carefully. Kincha bhikkave sabbang, chakkuncha rupacha, sotancha saddacha, ghanancha gandhacha, jivhacha rasacha, kayocha potabbacha, manocha dhammacha." The eye and external objects, the ear and sounds, the nose and smells, the tongue and tastes, the body and body contacts, the mind and mental objects. This is called all, Sabbā. Following this explanation, the Buddha offers an amazing challenge as follows. Yo bhikkave evang vadeyya. Monks, if anyone were to say thus, Ahametang sabbang paccakkhaya anyang sabbang panyapesami, I disapprove of that Sabbā and declare another Sabbā in its place. Monks, that would amount to nothing more than foolish prating. If questioned, he would be dumbfounded. Why? Because he has no understanding of the subject. The Buddha thus confirms the meaning of Sabbā. We come across another similar explanation in the Salayatana Saññutta itself. Venerable Samiddhi approaches the Buddha with a question. Loko lokoti bhante vucchati, kittavatam nuko bhante, loko va assa lokapanyati vati. Lord, reference is made to a world, To what extent is there a world or the manifestation of a world? The Buddha replies as follows. Yathako samidhi atichakku atirupa atichakku vinyanam atichakku vinyana vinyana tabba dhamma atitattha loko va lokapanyati va. Since the detailed explanation of the other senses is similar to that of chakku, the eye, let us confine our explanation to chakku. You will understand the rest. Samidhi, wherever an eye is present and external objects are present, visual consciousness is present, phenomena that should be known through eye consciousness are present, there exists a world, or the manifestation of a world. This is followed by the description of other sense organs, and lastly, the mind. Samidhi, wherever a mind is present, mental objects are present. Mind consciousness is present. Phenomena that should be known through mind consciousness are present. There exists a world, or the manifestation of a world. Now he explains the reverse of it. Samidhi, wherever the eye does not exist, external forms do not exist, eye consciousness does not exist, phenomena that should be known through eye consciousness do not exist, there exists neither a world nor the manifestation of a world. This explanation indicates that there is a state where the 6 sense spheres become non-existent. Let us now change over to a sutta we have often referred to earlier, the first sutta of the Digha Nikāya. It's the Brahmajala Sutta that casts a net over 62 views by way of rejecting them. After a critical review of these views, the Buddha says that whatever views exist then, whatever views existed in the past, and whatever views may arise in the future can be categorized under these 62 views. Then, the Buddha has some interesting comment to make about the formulators of these views. Monks, all those ascetics and Brahmins who hold views under these 62 categories, to quote the Pali words, Sabbete chahi Passayatanehi pussa pussa patisamvedenti. The different views they declare are based on various sense contacts they experience through the sense spheres. What is the outcome of formulating views based on feelings gained through sense spheres? Vedana paccaya tanha, tanha paccaya upadānaṃ, Upadana paccaya bhavo, bhava paccaya jati, jati paccaya jara marana soka parideva. To them, from feeling as condition, there arises craving. From craving as condition, there arises grasping. From grasping as condition, there arises becoming. From becoming as condition, there arises birth. From birth as condition, there arises decay, death, grief, lamentation. Since all these views have sprung up from feelings generated through contact with sense spheres, the ascetics and Brahmins who profess them are led from feeling to craving, from craving to grasping, from grasping to becoming. You see, they have no escape from samsara. Next, the discussion turns towards the identification of the real monk. In defining the term Vedagu as one who has mastery over all, ascetics and Brahmins have based their interpretation on views. But the Buddha's declaration is founded on a different footing. Channang passayatanānaṃ samudayang ca atthagamang ca asadang ca adīnavang ca nissaranam ca yatha bhutang pajanati. Ayang ime hi sabbeheva uttarītarang pajanati. At any time in my dispensation, a monk who understands with wisdom the six bases of contact as they really are, with regard to their arising, ceasing, satisfaction, perils, and stepping out, he far excels those others in his wisdom. That is how the Buddha explains the word Vedagu. The discussion about Salayatana continues further. There is another sutta similar to the Sabba Sutta mentioned earlier. On this occasion, the Buddha takes the monks by surprise by addressing them thus: Dvayang vo bhikkhave desissami. Monks, I will teach you two. What are the two? Chakkuncheva rupacha, sotancheva saddacha, ghanancheva gandhacha, jivhacheva rasacha, kayocheva pottabbacha, manocheva dhammacha. Each internal sense organ is stated together with its external sense object, the eye with forms, the ear with sounds, the nose with smells, the tongue with tastes, the body with body contacts, and the mind with mental objects. Here too the Buddha's challenge vibrates. This is the two. Anyone who says there is another two apart from this is only jabbering away like a fool. He cannot prove it. It is further confirmed by the Dvayang Sutta as well. In this discussion about Salayatana, we made reference to Salayatana Nirodha. We have time and again explained in our discourses that Nibbāna means the release from the six sense spheres in this world itself. It is the same as Nissarana. Now you see that cessation of the six sense spheres, Salayatana Nirodha, is attainable within this life. That realization dawns within the Arahata Phala Samapatti. Nibbāna is really the attainment of that Samapatti. Now I wish to switch over to another sutta to continue my explanation. After the evening retreat, Venerable Mahakotitha came to meet Venerable Sariputta one day. He asked him a very complicating question indeed. Friend Sariputta, channang passayatananang asesa viraga nirodha attanyang kinchi. At the total cessation of the six spheres of contact, is there anything else left? Venerable Sariputta rejects the question altogether by saying, Mahevang avuso, do not ask thus. But Venerable Mahakotitha pursued his questioning. At the total cessation of the six spheres of contact, isn't there anything else left? Venerable Sariputta's response was the same as earlier. The third question was a combination of the first two questions. Is there and isn't there anything else left? That alternative was also rejected by Venerable Sariputta. The final question was, at the total cessation of the six spheres, is there anything that neither exists nor not exists? Venerable Sariputta again said, Mahevang avuso. Then Venerable Mahakotitha plainly asked him, Friend, how can I understand what you say? Now comes Venerable Sariputta's explanation. If one says that at the total cessation of the six sense spheres of contact there is something left, it would amount to, here he uses an unusual word, appapanchang papancheti. I have explained this word papancha on earlier occasions to you. Appapanchang papancheti means using linguistic jargon in an inappropriate place. Seeing it at depth, it is proliferating or arguing where argument must not take place. The question whether there remains anything at the total cessation of the 6 sense spheres is in itself flawed. So are all the dilemmas and the quadrilemmas. They are all proliferations of theorists, as we have often reminded you. That is why Venerable Sariputta rejected them all as irrelevant. All 4 aspects of the argument are labeled as appapanchang papancheti, proliferating where proliferation must not take place. And finally, he concludes by saying, Yavata avuso channang passayatananang gati, tavata papanchassa gati, yavata papanchassa gati, tavata channang passayatananang gati. Friend, as far as the 6 sense spheres reach, that far the proliferation reaches. As far as the proliferation reaches, that far the 6 sense spheres reach. Channang avuso passayatananang asesa viraga nirodha papancha nirodho papancha vupasamo. Friend, with the total cessation of the 6 sense spheres, proliferation ceases, proliferation pacifies. Papancha nirodha is a synonym for Nibbāna. Proliferation is impossible where the 6 sense spheres have ceased. We can see this sutta is extremely enlightening, although it is deep. In order to delve a little deeper into the subject, I wish to recall another sutta very briefly for our purpose. At the end of a discourse, the Buddha once spoke thus to the monks. Tasmatiha bhikkave se ayatane veditabbe yatha chakkuncha nirujjati rupa sanyacha virajjati. Se ayatane veditabbe yatha sotancha nirujjati saddha sanyacha virajjati. It goes on in a similar strain. I shall explain the first. You must try to understand the rest. Monks, therefore this sphere should be understood. This sphere which is very unusual. The eye is extinct there. Perception of external forms fade away. The ear is extinct. Sounds fade away. The nose is extinct. Smells fade away. He continues until he winds up with Manocha nirujjati, Dhamma sanyacha virajjati. The mind is extinct. Perception of cognizable objects fade away. Thereby, the Buddha finally firmly establishes the fact that this sphere must be understood. This sphere must be understood. After this brief admonition, the Buddha leaves the assembly and withdraws to the monastery. He left his statements unexplained. The monks thought, the Buddha left us steeped in an unexplained puzzle. Perhaps we could seek a clarification from Venerable Ñāṇananda, who has been often complimented by the Buddha for his lucid explanations. When the puzzle was presented to Venerable Ñāṇananda, he, though reluctantly, responded thus, Well, let me give my brief comments to the problem, the way I understand it. Salayatana nirodhanko avuso bhagavata sandhaya bhasitam. Friends, the Buddha has spoken with reference to the cessation of the 6 sense spheres. Earlier, we have explained that Salayatana Nirodha is a synonym for Nibbāna. Here, the Buddha refers to the cessation of the 6 spheres as a special ayatana. This has often posed a problem to the scholars. It is now clear that crossing over this world is the extinction of the salayatana, the six sense spheres. It is a state where one acquires mastery over all. There are many more references to this attainment in the texts. On one occasion, two giant tuskers in wisdom, Venerable Mahakotita and Venerable Sariputta, accost each other over a very subtle doctrinal issue. You must understand that their discussions are done solely for our benefit. Venerable Mahakotita questions, the Sangyojanas or fetters are bonds. Is the eye bonded by external forms, or are external forms bonded by the eye? Is the ear bonded by sounds, or are sounds bonded by the ear? Is the nose bonded by the smells, or are the smells bonded by the nose? He goes on and lastly asks, is the mind bonded by cognizable objects, or are cognizable objects bonded by the mind? Venerable Sariputta's response was as follows, no, friend, the eye is not bonded by external forms. Neither are forms bonded by the eye. The ear is not bonded by sounds. Neither are sounds bonded by the ear. But if lustful sensuality arises dependent on those two, that is the bond. Next, in order to illustrate this point, he cites an example. In case, friend, a black ox and a white ox are tethered by the same chain, one cannot say that the black ox is bonded by the white ox, or the white one is bonded by the black one, in which the statements are both inapplicable. The bond is the chain between them. Similarly, friend, the eye is not bonded by forms. Neither are external forms bonded by the eye. The bond is the lustful sensuality that is generated between the two. The bond is attachment. Let me bring in another episode by way of a simile. I know you like stories. This was related to a group of monks on a certain occasion. Monks, one evening a certain tortoise crossed a river and was going in search of food. At the same time a fox was also walking about in search of food. The tortoise saw the fox at a distance and withdrew his limbs and head into the shell. He lay there as good as dead. The fox too saw the tortoise and kept guard by him, hoping to snatch off a limb the moment one comes out. But the tortoise continued his vigil, remaining perfectly still. The fox was compelled to give up hopes and depart. Next comes the comparison. Monks, remember that Mara is keeping constant vigil over you, just like that fox, hoping to break in through your eye or to break in through your ear. The Buddha teaches the technique of guarding oneself from the Mara. He brings in the secret of restraining one's senses, as he often does. Chakhuna rupang disvana nimitta gahi hoti, nanu bhyanjana gahi hoti. Monks, on seeing an external object, do not take in its characteristics or occupy yourself with its attributes. The two terms, nimitta and anubhyanjana, have to be differentiated. To cite an example, seeing an attractive form is nimittagahi, being drawn towards it. Observing more attributes that make the form attractive is anubhyanjana. That is nimittagahi and anubhyanjanagahi. Here the Buddha tries to explain the results of getting attracted to form and searching for more of its attractive attributes. It generates influxes and leads one to deterioration. If, monks, you keep the 6 doors closed, Mara will withdraw, defeated. Due to that restraint of the senses, one could avoid committing evil actions through the 6 sense doors, like the tortoise who keeps his limbs withdrawn. Next, see the beauty of that simile converted into verse by the Buddha. Kummova angani sake kapale, samodahang bhikkhu mano vitakke, anissito anyamahet hayano, parinibbuto na upavadeya kanchi. Just as a tortoise withdraws his head and limbs into its shell, a monk withdraws into himself against the mental reflections that are generated by the 5 sense bases, with the eye chasing behind visual objects and the ear chasing behind auditory objects, etc. He keeps guard over the sense bases. Then, anissito anyamahet hayano, he does not lean against anything, and na upavadeya, does not blame anybody, does not harass anybody. Parinibbuto, he attains extinction. Here we see that, with reference to sense restraint, the Buddha has taught the path leading to cessation or the total departure from the 6 sense spheres. When we touch on salayatana, the topic of contact crops up. Since we have referred to the spheres of contact when discussing the Paṭicca Samuppāda, I think the following sutta will be of interest to you, though deep in meaning. The monk Molya Pagguna asked the Buddha, Ko nu ko bhante pusati? Lord, who is it that touches? This monk, due to his notion of self, seems to imagine there is a person who touches. The Buddha replies, I do not say there is anyone who touches. Had I said so, your question would have been relevant. But since I do not say so, your question should be, Kim paccaya nu ko bhante passo? The Buddha corrects the question Molya Pagguna had asked. Dependent on what is contact, sir? It is not appropriate to refer to anybody touching. And my answer would be, Salayatana paccaya passo, passa paccaya vedana. Dependent on the 6 sense spheres is contact. Dependent on contact is feeling. Feeling being a new topic for Molya Pagguna, he got hold of it for further probing. He questioned, Ko nu ko bhante vedeti? Who is it, Lord, who feels? Again, the Buddha replied, I do not say a person feels. Had I said so, your question would have been relevant. Since my statement is different, your question is inappropriate. This is how you should have questioned me. Kim paccaya nu ko bhante vedana? Conditioned by what, Lord, is feeling? If you put the question in that form, I would answer thus. Passa paccaya vedana, vedana paccaya tanha. The Buddha introduced a term hitherto unspoken of, i.e., tanha. Being in a questioning mood, Molya Pagguna's immediate response was, Lord, who is it that craves? This is the Buddha's reply. I do not say that anyone does the craving. The appropriate question would be, Kim paccaya nu ko bhante tanha? And the Buddha continues in his own style, Vedana paccaya tanha, tanha paccaya upadānaṃ. Concealed within this style of replying is something amazing. Please try to understand its significance. I shall explain it with a simile. Imagine an artist who wishes to draw a link in a chain. If he draws only one solitary link, identifying it would be difficult, don't you think? He has to at least draw half of a link on either side for the chain to take shape. Now, I hope you understand why the Buddha added an extra link which Molliyapagguna did not inquire about. It is to make him realize that this is a chain. Salayatana paccaya passo. Dependent on the six sense spheres, contact comes to be. The Buddha did not stop at that. He introduced passa paccaya vedana. I am sure you understand that the Buddha very effectively introduces the law of dependent arising at each link. He overstepped the valid answer by annexing Vedana to his explanation. Venerable Molliyapagguna got caught up in it. The Buddha led him on to Tanha and finally to Upadana. Ultimately, it shows that whatever we speak in day-to-day usage, the Buddha firmly makes explicit the depth of the reality of Paṭicca Samuppāda. No one does the contacting. From Salayatana arises contact, passa. From passa arises feeling, vedana. So it continues. You see what an important sutta this is. If we were to go deeper into the subject, I am reminded of an occasion where a group of monks relate an experience of theirs to the Buddha. Lord, certain ascetics and Brahmins in other sects ask us, for what purpose do you lead the higher life under the Buddha? What is the aim of your renunciation? Then, Lord, we reply like this. We have renounced for the realization of dukkha, suffering. Our aim is to understand dukkha. Lord, in replying so, are we speaking in accordance with your teaching, or are we contradicting you? We have come to you for clarification. The Buddha replies, Well done, monks. Your replies are perfectly correct. Suppose they ask you what this dukkha is that you wish to realize. Then you must reply as follows. To put it in English, the I is suffering. Material forms are suffering. I consciousness is suffering. Eye contact is suffering. All the feelings, both pleasant and unpleasant, that arise through eye contact are suffering. You have to understand the other sense spheres similarly. You know quite well that under the Four Noble Truths, the five aggregates of grasping are referred to as dukkha. Here, the Buddha explains dukkha in terms of salayatana. Instead of the pancha upadana khanda, it exposes the nature of suffering with the six sense spheres. There are several suttas of this nature that try to reveal the impermanent nature of the salayatanas. One is the Dutiya Dvayang Sutta, which closely follows the Dvayang Sutta we discussed earlier. There the Buddha declares, Dvayang bhikkave paticca viññāṇaṃ sambhoti. Monks, the consciousness arises dependent on two. It does not arise without a cause. Two come together to give rise to consciousness. Chakkhuncha paticca rupecha uppajjati chakkhu viññāṇaṃ. Dependent on the eye and the visual object, there arises visual consciousness. In a similar manner, the ear and sound give rise to auditory consciousness. Each consciousness is dependently arisen. It goes to prove that always arising takes place dependent on two. The next important statement is tinnang sangati passo. The implication here is quite deep. Let us discuss it now. The I consciousness arises depending on the I and the material object. Not being aware of this dependent nature, not being able to understand it, the moment it is treated as three, it becomes contact. Based on the I and form, there arises I consciousness. But at this point, if it is treated as three, tinnang sangati passo, then contact arises. This is a very deep aspect of phassa, contact. We usually say somebody touched in ordinary language, being ignorant of reality as it is. But here it is specifically explained that contact does not arise devoid of a dependent cause. We have repeatedly reminded you that an unspecified vijnana does not arise just as a fire does not arise without a dependent cause. If it is consciousness, it has to be either eye consciousness or ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, or, lastly, mind consciousness. But you must remember, neither of these is stored up somewhere. They arise with the coming together of two. That is where the Dvayang interpretation comes in. That alone is the secret in the Paṭicca Samuppāda. Fire never arises on its own independently. Whatever causes a fire, that fire is identified by that name. A fire caused by paper or firewood or straw or paddy husk is identified each by the dependent cause. Similarly, a consciousness caused by the eye and the material form coming together is identified as cakkhu vijnana, visual consciousness. But due to ignorance or foolishness, if one does not heed the fact that eye consciousness arises dependent on those two causes and treats everything as one, he would see contact as real and give chase behind the illusory image. The eye is here, the material form is there. He runs after the mirage. This explains a very deep aspect of consciousness. Now we have explored several aspects of the useful topic salayatana. We told you at the outset that one has to know the dependent causes of arising in order to get a perfect understanding of the salayatana. So also one has to know their cessation, their satisfaction and perils. Then comes nissarana, or stepping out of the attraction towards salayatana. Next, I wish to discuss with you a very important sutta called the Salayatanika Sutta in the Majjhima Nikāya. It can be considered as the most important discourse on the six sense spheres. Here, you find the Buddha doing a comparative analysis. On one side is the ordinary worldling who understands the six sense spheres at his mental level and the satisfaction and perils that he experiences. On the other hand, a person who has a realistic vision of the salayatana, being convinced of the temporary nature of enchantment and the inherent unpleasantness, obtains release from them. This is how the Buddha commences his comparison. Chakkhum bhikkave ajānaṃ apassang yatha bhūtaṃ rūpe ajānaṃ apassang yatha bhūtaṃ cakkhu viññānaṃ ajānaṃ apassang yatha bhūtaṃ. And he goes on. Let's study the meanings. Jnanaṃ passang means knowledge and vision. Not having knowledge and vision of the true nature of the eye as it is, and external objects as they are, as it is, must be understood with regards to impermanence. Not seeing the impermanence, not seeing the eye consciousness as it is, which is the outcome of those two, and not seeing eye contact as it is, and not seeing the resultant pleasant, unpleasant, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant feelings as they really are, one develops attachment towards the eye. Chakkhusming sarajjati, to the external objects, to the eye consciousness, to the eye contact, and to the pleasant, unpleasant, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant feelings resulting from eye contact. Now you can understand the entanglement of the worldlings with the six spheres. Did you notice that the clinging runs into the mind as well? Unable to understand the mind wisely as it really is, one gets attached to the mind. The mental phenomena that the mind focuses on, the mind consciousness, mind contacts and feelings arising thereof. Then the resultant perils of this process are discussed. Tassa saratassa sangyuttassa sammulhassa asādānupassino viharato ayating panchupadana khanda upachayang gachanti. That worldling, due to his ignorance, firmly clings to and gets bound to the above-mentioned sense spheres, sense objects, and the resultant consciousness, so that, caught in the deception of apparent pleasure, he gets into deep trouble. Ayating panchupadana khanda, he accumulates the five-fold aggregates of grasping again. As a result of gripping the temporary mass of phenomena that pass by, one develops the five-fold aggregates of grasping. Then its perils are explained. Tassa kāyikāpi daratthā pavadhanti, cetasikapi daratthā pavadhanti, kāyikāpi santāpa pavadhanti, cetasikapi santapa pavadhanti, kāyikāpi parilāha pavadhanti, cetasikapi parilāha pavadhanti, so kāya dukkhampi ceto dukkhampi patisamvedeti. These are the perils he has to experience. His physical distresses increase. His mental distresses increase. His physical pains increase. His mental pains increase. His physical burnings increase. His mental burnings increase. He experiences a mass of physical and mental grief. This explanation deals with the worldly aspect. Now look at the opposite aspect. Chakkuncha ko bhikkave janang passang yatha bhutang rupe janang passang yatha bhutang chakku vinyanang janang passang yatha bhutang chakku sampassang janang passang yatha bhutang. Thus continues the account. If one were to see the eye as it really is, which means to see the impermanent nature of the eye, and the physical objects as they really are, and see the resultant eye consciousness as impermanent in its very nature, and also the eye contact and feeling as they really are, such a person, such a monk, who disciplines himself in this dispensation, seeing the perils of the sensory activity, undergoes this wonderful change. Tassa panchupadana khanda apachayang gachanti. The five aggregates of grasping diminish in him. Compare this with the worldling. Every experience is accumulated in his mind. He accumulates the relevant material objects as his own aggregate of form, and the feelings as his own heap of feelings. This is what leads him on in samsara. But the disciplined monk, in contrast, sees impermanence then and there. Nothing remains as residue. Therefore, apachayang gacchati. They are gradually exhausted. Here, upachaya and apachaya stand for samsara and Nibbāna, respectively. The Buddha attempts to illustrate how the mind inclined towards Nibbāna disciplines itself to wipe out the five aggregates of grasping. Then the Buddha goes on to describe the result thereof. Tassa kāyikāpi daratthā pahiyanti, cetasikapi daratthā pahiyanti, kāyikāpi santāpa pahiyanti, cetasikapi santāpa pahiyanti, kāyikāpi parilāha pahiyanti, cetasikapi parilaha pahiyanti. So kaya sukampi ceto sukampi patisamvedeti. His physical distresses diminish. His mental distresses diminish. His physical pains diminish. His mental pains diminish. His physical burnings diminish. His mental burnings diminish. He experiences immense physical and mental happiness. Then the Buddha delves deeper into this discipline. A monk who disciplines himself thus finds himself progressing unbelievably fast on the Noble Eightfold Path. I wish to remark that this sutta will be of immense help to those who meditate on the Salayatana. Then the Buddha proclaims the final result of this training. Ya tatha bhutassa ditti sa sa hoti sammaditthi. If such a disciplined monk holds a view, that will definitely be the right view. This refers not to the ordinary sammaditthi that we talk about, but is the very path, right view at its deepest level. If such a monk holds an intention, it is the right intention. If he makes an effort, it is always a right effort. If he has awareness, it is a correct awareness. If he attains any concentration, it is bound to be the right concentration. Now, did you notice that only 5 links in the Noble Eightfold Path are discussed here? Now the Buddha explains why 3 items were left out. Pubbeva ko panassa kaya kammang vachikammang ajivo suparisuddho hoti. A monk who undertakes this strenuous discipline at the very outset dispels all gross impure tendencies which have no place in the path to Nibbāna. He is beyond lowly talk and action. He is pure in word, action, and livelihood. Samma vacha, samma kammanta, samma ajiva. At the higher level of the path, he concentrates on right view, right intention, right effort, right awareness, and right concentration. Samma ditti, samma sankappa, samma vayama, samma sati, samma samadhi. Now the Buddha takes us further up the path. The monk who develops the Noble Eightfold Path in this manner attains purity of mind. Tassa evang imang ariyang attangikang maggang bhavayato chattaropi satipatthana bhavana paripuring gachanti. Chattaro samappadhana bhavana paripuring gachanti. Chattaro iddhipada bhavana paripuring gachanti. Panchapi indriyani bhavana paripuring gachanti. Panchapi balani bhavana paripuring gachanti. Sattapi bhujhanga bhavana paripuring gachanti. This is a very clear explanation of how one perfects the 37 factors of enlightenment through this disciplinary training. In the process of practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, the fourfold mindfulness or satipatthana develops spontaneously. So does the fourfold right effort, the 4 psychic powers, the 4 faculties, the 5 powers, and the 7 factors of enlightenment. This is a description of the transcendental stage or the supramundane stage. The Buddha speaks further of the monk who has perfected himself thus far. Tassime dve dhamma yuganadha vattanti samathocha vipassanacha. In him, these 2 factors, namely calm and insight, prevail like yoked oxen. 2 oxen yoked to a cart have to step together. Similarly, you have heard, I am sure, as samatha and vipassana meditators, that one attains concentration through calm and the 3 siññāta, tilakkana, through insight. There are three methods one could follow. After practicing samatha, one could proceed to practice vipassana. Samatha pubbāngamam vipassanam. Or else, practice vipassana first and then samatha. Vipassana pubbāngamam samatham. There is yet another method. Samatham ca vipassanam ca yugannadhang bhaveti. That is, pulling together like two oxen yoked to a cart. Both samatha and vipassana develop yoked together. Now, the Buddha reveals the final result of this exertion. So ye dhamma abhinya parinyaya, te dhamme abhinya parijanati. Ye dhamma abhinya pahatabba, te dhamme abhinya pajahati. Ye dhamma abhinya bhavetabba, te dhamme abhinya bhaveti. Ye dhamma abhinya satchikatabba, te dhamme abhinya satchikaroti. Whatever mental factors have to be comprehended through higher knowledge, he comprehends them through higher knowledge. Whatever mental factors have to be eliminated through higher knowledge, he eliminates them through higher knowledge. Whatever mental factors have to be developed through higher knowledge, he develops them through higher knowledge. Whatever mental factors have to be realized through higher knowledge, he realizes them through higher knowledge. The Buddha then proceeds to explain these Dhammas. What should be comprehended are the five aggregates of grasping. What should be eliminated are ignorance and craving. What should be developed are calm and insight, samatha and vipassana. What should be realized and perfected are the wisdom of arahanthood and emancipation through arahanthood, which are known by the terms vijja vimutti. This is a wonderful sutta that deals with different methods applicable in practicing the path to Nibbāna. It is clear that there are several methods to attain Nibbāna, depending on the object of meditation. Some may realize the impermanence of the five aggregates of grasping through the meditation of the three characteristics. Some may meditate on the primary elements. Some may meditate on impermanence in life through the medium of the six sense spheres. Finally, all this converge, add up to reach the summit. Last of all, samatha and vipassana, like two oxen yoked to a cart, pull together in the final phase. Three factors in the Noble Eightfold Path having been already eliminated, the remaining five are eliminated during this final phase. It is the transcendental Noble Eightfold Path that is referred to here. Misconduct through word, body, and livelihood become inapplicable here, as they have been already wiped out. When the meditator's mind functions on a transcendental level, only the other five factors become active. The Buddha explains how one could reach the final goal of vijja vimutti phala through the analysis of the six sense spheres. When referring to impermanence, I am reminded of several more suttas that may confirm this position. Once the Buddha addresses the monks and declares, Chakkung anicchang viparinami anyatha bhavi rupa anicca viparinamino anyatha bhavino chakku vinyanang anicchang viparinami anyatha bhavi. The eye is impermanent, subject to change and subject to otherwiseness. They are the three sides of impermanence. It is impermanent is an incomplete statement. Due to its impermanent character, it is subject to change. Finally, become otherwise or different from what it was. This same description is applicable to material objects and also to visual consciousness. They are impermanent, subject to change, and become otherwise. Now comes a question based on this discussion. Monks, how can a permanent thing arise from an impermanent thing? If the I is impermanent, if material objects are impermanent, how could I consciousness become permanent? The eye contact resulting from I consciousness is also impermanent. The experience that arises dependent on eye contact is also impermanent. The purpose of this explicit description is to drive the point home. The entire statement, Aniccaṃ viparināmi anyatha bhavi, is repeated at every point. Everything is chala cheva, vayacha, anicca, viparinamino, anyatha bhavino. Here, several terms are used to stress the character of impermanence, such as quivers, withers, impermanent, subject to change, has the character of otherwiseness. Somebody wishes to see some object well, but the moment he looks, both the object and the eye undergo a swift change. Although we are unaware of this change, they quiver. That's why they are called movies. Unable to understand the fast quivering nature, one establishes oneself on the perception of compact and tries to grasp material objects. I saw this form with my own eye. It is the very same form. It is not easy to understand the change it undergoes every moment. In this manner, the Buddha makes explicit the nature of change everywhere. This is the second Dvayang Sutta in the Salayatana Vagga of the Samyutta Nikāya, which is of immense help to meditators on impermanence. It winds up as follows: Chala cheva vayacha anicca viparinamino. They quiver, wither, has the nature of impermanence and change. It is invisible to the physical eye. It is visible only to the eye of wisdom. As the meditator on vipassana reaches higher and higher, he begins to see through the world as totally different to what others see. The Thera and Theri Gathas have recorded amazing objects of meditation, such as a flowing stream, a fire. He who has constantly cultivated the nature of impermanence will see impermanence in everything. The fallen leaf, the blossoming and fading flower is impermanent. That impermanence is very strong. At times, the Buddha has declared anicca sanya bhikkhave bhavita bahulikata sabbang kamaragang pariyadiyati sabbang ruparagang pariyadiyati sabbang bhavaragang pariyadiyati sabbang avijjang pariyadiyati samuhanti. A thorough training in the perception of impermanence results in total elimination of the attachment to sensuality. The passion for material objects, the yearning for becoming, ignorance, and finally the subtle conceit of self are totally eradicated. The Buddha has spoken so much in praise of the development of the perception of impermanence that he has once remarked, "It is incorrect to say there are two paths to Nibbāna because they all converge at the summit." One has to practice either the four foundations of mindfulness or the perception of impermanence. This point is confirmed in the Mahāsalayatanika Sutta. However, there is no contradiction here because both serve the same purpose. At a superficial glance, we see one disciplining oneself in four foundations of mindfulness following the accepted methodology. He follows this one and only path until he realizes Nibbāna. That is the accepted method. But we see that impermanence is also declared as the path. There are two paths to gain control over defilements. One is the development of the four foundations of mindfulness. The other is the development of the perception of impermanence. The latter serves as a strong support in developing the spiritual qualities, such as the fourfold Satipatthanas and the four methods of right effort, Sammappadhana. Everything that the Buddha has taught about impermanence is so amazingly relevant in the process of spiritual training. We have discussed here only a limited amount of that wealth of information. We must understand that the Buddha uses a variety of comparisons to emphasize the importance of salayatana. Vedagu refers to the Arahant. Triveda is not the three Vedas of the Brahmins, but the Tevijja Arahants are endowed with, i.e., the knowledge of recollecting previous births, the knowledge of the divine eye, the knowledge of the elimination of influxes. Pubbe nivasanusati Ñāṇa, Dibba Chakhu, and Asavakkaya Ñāṇa. The entirety of Tevijja comes under the purview of Nissarana, or stepping out, mentioned under 6 sense spheres. The earlier ascetics and Brahmins unfortunately missed this aspect of Nissarana. Neither did they understand the origin of Salayatana, the 6 sense spheres. It was the Buddha who proclaimed that a Vedagu is found only in his path, and so is all spiritual perfection. The Mahasalayatana Sutta in particular emphasizes the teachings of Salayatana as we see. Although my discourse is brief, I have tried to direct all my explanations towards the practice of meditation. I hope it will be helpful to you. The doctrine of impermanence proclaimed by the Buddha is of immeasurable importance. Everything is included within it. On the other hand, everything in the world takes place within these 6 sense spheres. We cannot realize it because we are running after a mirage. The day we realize this truth, all problems will dissolve. I think it is enough for today. You should read or listen to this topic of meditation more often. Internalize it and put it into practice with determination. It will help you to tread the Buddha's path to Nibbāna as far as possible. The Buddha has clarified the direct path to Nibbāna, or Vijjavimutti. Today, we try to expand your knowledge on the Salayatana in this series of discourses on Paṭicca Samuppāda. We hope to discuss the other topics, if time permits, later. I wish you would reach the path of Dhamma without delay, with the help of this series of talks. May you acquire the strength, determination, and power to fulfill the requirements in perfecting the path and attaining fruition as Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Anagami, and Arahant. Whatever beings there be, from the lowest hell Avicii to the highest Brahma world, Akanita, may they all rejoice in this insightful sermon. May it be conducive to their attainment of Nibbāna. May you attain Nibbāna in this very life. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.